So I'm just going to go back to that last paragraph on 64 where he says resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From resentment stem all forms of spiritual disease. For I have been not only mentally and physically ill, mentally my obsession and physically my allergy, I have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, I straighten out mentally and physically. I don't have to work on my mental. I don't have to work on my physical. All I have to work on is my spiritual. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. So this is where he begins these directions that we read about way back in chapter 2. So we listed, and I brought a new bunch of prompts for you guys. They're up here on the table. So this is the people, institutions, or principles with whom I have a resentment with, I'm angry, or I feel threatened by. The first sheet is for your resentments, and it's from the wording right out of the book. These were originally the Joe and Charlie forms that they gave you when you went to one of their seminars. So get up here, Alfonso, and get yourself some. And here's a form, a sheet that about fears, and it's what I'm going to be reading to you is on these forms, and it gives you a way to take one of your sponsees through these steps. And all the wording from the book is on them, so it should make it easy to understand. It has a sheet about the basic instincts of life, which creates self, which is very important because they don't talk a whole lot about that in the book. It also gives you a sheet where you have for 6 and 7, where you have your character defects on the left side, and the opposite, God's will for you, on the right side. And then there's a sheet where you can do a daily inventory. So, and you can copy these at home or whatever, but I'm telling you, these sheets were invaluable when I did the Joe and Charlie stuff. And for years, I had misplaced them, and don't ask me. I have so much AA stuff at home, you guys wouldn't believe it, but I found them. And I went down and copied a whole bunch of them so we could have them. So he says, here's our first direction. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. So that's our first column. And you notice after he says we were angry, there's a period, meaning we stop there and we make that list of the people, institutions, principles, which we have trouble with. And we make the whole list before we go on. You don't work across. Then he's going to give us our second instructions, our second list, our second column. I asked myself, why was I angry? What caused me to resent this person? And I'm going to make that whole list out. And when I'm done with that whole list, then he says, in most cases, it was found that my self-esteem, my pocketbook, my ambitions, my personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So I was sore. I was burned up. On my grudge list, I set opposite each name my injuries. Was it my self-esteem, my security, my ambitions, my personal or sex relations, which had been interfered with? So he's used my grudge list, he's used threatened by, and remember this, I cannot get a resentment unless one of my instincts is threatened. I can't even have a resentment unless it doesn't mean it's real. It can be, I can be perceiving something as a threat. So, and and it's called affects my, as you see in the description in the book on page 65, he says, I'm resentful at, that's column 1, the cause, column 2, affects my, column 3. But rather than affects my, don't forget, it's your instincts. And the reason that's so important, and they don't have it in the big book, so I'm going to just read a paragraph out of chapter 4 of the 12 and 12. So he says, so these desires for the sex relation, for material and emotional security, and for companionship are perfectly necessary and right, and surely God-given. Yet these instincts, so necessary for my existence, often far exceed their proper function. Powerfully, blindly, and many times subtly, they drive me, dominate me, and insist upon ruling my life. My desires for sex, for material and emotional security, and for an important place in society often tyrannize me. When thus out of joint, man's natural desires cause him great trouble, practically all the trouble there is. That's a pretty heavy. I'm on page 42 in step 4 in the 12 and 12. So what he's telling you is when I feel my instincts threatened, I'm going to do something. And it's probably not going to be something you're going to like. Now, so let's look for a second at this example on page 65. We were usually as definite as this example. I'm resentful at Mr. Brown. The cause, his attention to my wife, affects my sex relations, self-esteem, fear. That's one resentment he had with Mr. Brown. Now, this is his second resentment with Mr. Brown. The cause, told my wife of my mistress. That affects his sex relations, self-esteem, fear. What I want you to see is, as we go down here, every fear he had was caused by his own behavior. If he didn't have a mistress, he wouldn't be fearful that his wife might leave him. Okay? He's resentful at Mr. Brown. This is his third resentment of Mr. Brown. Brown may get my job at the office. That affects his security, self-esteem, fear again. Fear is listed beside self-esteem every time they list it. Now here's his next resentment for his next person. I'm resentful at Mrs. Jones because she's a nut. She snubbed me. She committed her husband for drinking. He's my friend. She's a gossip. That affects his personal relationship, self-esteem, fear. Now, his next resentment is with his employer. The cause, unreasonable, unjust, overbearing, threatens to fire me for padding my expense account. Wow. Not very open-minded, a boss. That affects his self-esteem, fear, security. His next resentment is for his wife. Misunderstands and nags, likes Brown. Wants house put in her name. So that affects his pride, personal and sex relations, security, fear. So do you see how he's caused all his problems? So if I see the truth in the resentment, I can't have the resentment anymore. So now he's going to spend a page and a half giving us instructions on the fourth column. He says, so now I got a 3-column list, right? And he says, I went back through my life. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. When I was finished, I considered it carefully. The first thing apparent was that this world and its people were often quite wrong. To conclude that others were wrong was as far as I ever got. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong me and I stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse, and then I was sore at myself. Remorse being guilt. But the more I fought and tried to have my own way, the worse matters got. As in war, the victor only seemed to win. My moments of triumph were short lived. It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that I permit these, wow, he just said, I permit resentments. Do I squander the hours that might have been worthwhile? But with the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal. And here's why. For when harboring such feelings, I shut myself off from God. He says, from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns, my obsession, and I drink again. And with me, to drink is to die. If I were to live, I had to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for me. They may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for alcoholics, these things are poison. Now, I still have that 3-column list, and he says, I turn back to the list, for it held the key to the future. He's talking about, these are the instructions for the 4th column again. Why does the 4th column hold the key to my future? Because I need the 4th column to work step 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. I can't work it with the first 3 columns. I got to work those steps with the 4th column. I was prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. I began to see that the world and its people really dominated me. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied, meaning I made it up, it's a lie, or real, had power to actually kill. How could I escape? I saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? He's going to tell us right now. This is instructions on how to get rid of resentment. I could not wish them away any more than alcohol. This was my course. I realized that the people who wronged me were perhaps spiritually sick. Though I did not like their symptoms, column 2, and the way these disturbed me, column 3, they, like myself, were sick too. Now, you ask most people in AA, I don't care if they got 50 years, you ask them what they do with the resentment, they'll say, pray for the person. That's not what this book says. Next line, I asked God to help me show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. I pray for me. I don't pray for them. I pray for me to not be angry, not, okay? Then he's very specific here. I ask God to help me show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, I said to myself, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry. Thy will be done. I avoid retaliation or argument. I wouldn't treat sick people that way. I cannot be, I'm sorry, if I do, I destroy my chance of being helpful. I cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show me how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. Referring to the list again. Now there's 3 columns. Putting out of my mind the wrongs others had done. When my sponsor did this with me, he said, "What does putting out of your mind mean, Ray?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Forget about it." I resolutely look for my own mistakes. It doesn't say my sins. It doesn't say I'm a rotten person. I made mistakes. I was spiritually sick. We just read about the spiritual malady. Where had I been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Though a situation had not been entirely my fault, I tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where was I to blame? The inventory was mine, not the other man's. When I saw my faults, I listed them. That's column 4. My faults, the mistakes I made, has nothing to do with the other guy now. I disregard them. I put them out of my mind. Does that make sense to everybody? You know, my sponsor said to me, when people had resentment, they all didn't do what you did, Ray. In other words, when I got mad, I did something usually pretty not cool with you. And he told me, he said, I wanted to blame my behavior on them. No. He didn't say, you know, one time I said, I look for my part. He said, do you see part anywhere in these words? It isn't in you. People tell you my part. No, it's not your part. He said, you did what you did, Ray, because you're capable of behaving that way. Wow. He didn't even rub my back when he said that. So we got to be who we are. I got to be accountable. I behaved in a way that other people don't behave. And that's what I'm listing here. I placed them before me in black and white. I admitted my wrongs honestly and was willing to set these matters straight. So if we can do this, does this make sense to everybody? I mean, I had a terrible resentment with my father. And when I was 20 years old, I came home one day and found him hanging in the garage. He had hung himself, committed suicide. And I'm mad at him. I'm even madder at him when I got a bigger resentment when I find that he's hung himself. And it took my sponsor to say, hey, Ray, he hung himself. He didn't hang you. It's none of your business. That business of his suicide was between him and God. It's none of your business. Remember, we agreed on page 63, on 62, I'm going to quit playing God. So now let's go further here. So that completes your resentment inventory. But now, notice the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of my existence was shot through with it. It set in motion trains of circumstances which brought me misfortune I felt I didn't deserve. But did not I myself set the ball rolling? Sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. I reviewed my fears thoroughly. I put them on paper. So now here's another inventory. This is the fear inventory. Even though I had no resentment in connection with them, I asked myself, why do I have this fear? So there's just 2 columns in a fear inventory. Why do I have the fear? And then he says, wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? And if you look at the prompt sheet, it gives you different ways that self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. I remember Joe and Charlie told us, decisions I make in fear cause more fear. Some of us once had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made me cocky, it was worse. Perhaps there is a better way. We think so. For I am now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. I trust infinite God rather than my finite self. I am in the world to play the role he assigns. We read him at the bottom of 62. He's already assigned us roles. I'm the actor, the agent, and the child. Just to the extent I do as I think he would have me, and humbly rely on him, does he enable me to match calamity with serenity? There's a promise right there. I never apologize to anyone for depending upon my creator. I can laugh at those who think spirituality the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it is the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. I never apologize for God. Instead, I let God demonstrate through Ray what he can do. I ask him to remove my fear and direct my attention to what he would have me be. Once again, the actor, the agent, or the child. That's my three. If I'm not in one of those lanes, I'm out of my lane. At once, I commenced to outgrow fear. So when I'm close to God and I'm trusting God, I never feel fear. Does that make any sense? Now here comes the third inventory. And this is the one you hear the least about in AA and the one that causes the most trouble. And please understand, when he says now about sex, it really isn't about sex. It's about my relations with others. That's what it's really about. It doesn't even have to involve sex. If you're emotionally involved with somebody in a love relationship, what did it look like when it began? And he's going to give us all these questions to ask ourselves. Many of us needed an overhauling there. But above all, I tried to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off track. Here I find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes, perhaps. One set of voices cry that sex is the lust of a lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. Then we have voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we do not have enough of it or that it isn't the right kind. They see its significance everywhere. One school will allow man no flavor for his fare, and the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet. We want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? And so my sponsor made me, when I looked at this, he said, everybody you hear all over AA, don't get involved with another person. He said, it's none of their business. They're not supposed to be telling you that. What's their record? We're not supposed to be the arbiter of anybody's sex life. So that's not my job to tell you that. If you get in a relationship, it's my job when you come to me to tell you my experience and What happened to me? I reviewed my own conduct over the years past. And now he's going to give you a whole bunch of questions to ask ourselves, 7 of them here. Where had I been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom had I hurt? Did I unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where was I at fault? What should I have done instead? We got this all down on paper and looked at it. You notice he says, what should I have done instead? Why doesn't he say, what could I have done instead? I couldn't have done it any differently because I'm still spiritually sick. I didn't always do what I did because I wanted to do what I did. I don't know how many of you heard Chuck Chamberlain, but Chuck Chamberlain says people don't do what they do because that's what they want to do. They do what they do because that's what they have to do. And when I was spiritually sick, I did what I had to do. In this way, I tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for my future sex life. Sane and sound. Sane. Rational mentally. Healthy. Sound. Free from defect, damage, or decay. Those are right out of the dictionary. Ideal. Thought of as perfect. So I'm supposed to think about this stuff. I subject each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? I ask God to mold my ideals and help me to live up to them. I remembered always that my sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed. Whatever my ideal turns out to be, I must be willing to grow toward it. I must be willing to make amends where I have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, I treat sex as I would any other problem. In meditation, I ask God what I should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if I want it. My sponsor reminded me, he says, it doesn't say the right answer is going to be what you want, right? It says it's going to come if I want it. God alone can judge our sex situation. Counsel with persons is often desirable, but we let God be the final judge. We realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. I avoid hysterical thinking or advice. Suppose I fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. Does this mean I'm going to get drunk? Some people tell us so, but this is only a half truth. It depends on me and my motives. If I am sorry for what I have done and have the honest desire to let God take me to better things, I believe I will be forgiven and will have learned my lesson. If I am not sorry and my conduct continues to harm others, I am quite sure to drink. This isn't a theory, this is facts out of my experience. To sum up about sex, I earnestly pray for the right ideal, for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity, and for the strength to do the right thing. If sex is very troublesome, I throw myself the harder into helping others. I think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. So he's given us really good instruction and definite things to do about this. And, the other thing he told me, it's up to me to realize that people are doing the best they can based on their spiritual awareness. So I can't expect everybody to act a particular way. And it's not about me. If I have been thorough about my personal inventory, I have written down a lot. I have listed and analyzed my resentments. I have begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. They were futile. I squandered days being resentful, not hours. It says hours, and I squandered a lot of time doing that. I commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. I have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men, even my enemies, for I look on them as sick people. I have listed the people I have hurt by my conduct. I hurt some people that I did not resent. They weren't on my resentment list. And I had to go to them and make amends. And they were people I wanted to remain in my life. Some of them were good friends. You know, it says later in the amends, it says it's harder to go to an enemy than a friend. No, I had to go make some amends to people I was hoping stayed in my life. And it was, if I didn't like you to begin with, what do I care? I'm just cleaning my side of the street.
It says we have listed the people we have hurt. So where did I make that list? I know I have my resentment, and I know I have this. That be our sex thing in our emotional relationship.
There's a in these prompts, there's a thing that it talks about people I harmed that weren't on your resentment list.
Okay.
They, in other words, they weren't on my sex. They weren't on any list. In other words, you can hurt people just by the way you acted. And I'm willing to set straight in the past if I can. In this book, you read again and again that faith did for me what I could not do for myself. I hope you are convinced now that God can remove. Now, here's the reason we're doing all this. We're hoping that we can see that God can remove all the self-will that blocked you from him. Self-will is what blocked God out of my life. Remember we read that there was a requirement for step 3, and it said that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. You know, and everybody in here knows somebody that's unhappy. Well, you think anybody would will themselves to be unhappy? No. So it tells us right there, self-will doesn't work. If you have already made a decision, step 3, and an inventory of your grosser handicap, step 4, you have made a good beginning. That being so, you have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. So one of the definitions of God is truth. So if I'm seeing truth about myself, I'm getting God into me finally. Does that make sense? Let's go over to page 72. Nobody knows anything about, you know, people tell you don't get emotionally involved in the first year. They don't know anything. They don't know whether that's good or bad. Nobody's ever done it, so we don't have anything to. So let's go over to 72. Into action. Geez, I just got done with the inventory. Don't I get some time off? No. Having made my personal inventory, what shall I do about it? I have been trying to get a new attitude. Step 2. A new relationship with my Creator. Step 3. And to discover the obstacles in my path. Step 4. I have admitted certain defects. I have ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. Self-will. selfishness and self-centeredness. I have put my finger on the weak items in my personal inventory. Now these are about to be cast out. This requires action on my part, which, when completed, will mean that I have admitted to God, to myself, and to another human being the exact nature of my defects. This brings me to the fifth step in the program of recovery mentioned in the preceding chapter. This is perhaps difficult, especially discussing my defects with another person. I had never discussed any of this stuff with another person, ever. I mean, I'll tell you how bad I was. My dad, I told you, hung himself. We both worked in the motion picture industry. And guys, my dad was 54 years old when he hung himself. And guys would come in and they'd say, Ray, did your dad have a heart attack? I'd say, yeah. I didn't want to say he committed suicide. Not because of him. I'm worried what they're going to think about me. That's how selfish and self-centeredness, how powerful it could be and how much it can dominate your life. Does that make sense? So I never planned on telling anybody all this stuff I'm telling this sponsor. I think I have done well enough in admitting these things to myself. There is doubt about that. In actual practice, we usually find that a solitary self-appraisal insufficient. Many of us thought it necessary to go much further. I will be more reconciled to discussing myself with another person when I see good reasons why I should do so. The best reason first. If I skip this vital step, I may not overcome drinking. Time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives. Trying to avoid this humbling experience, they have turned to easier methods. Almost invariably, they got drunk. Having persevered with the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. We think the reason is that they never completed their house cleaning. They took inventory all right, but hung on to some of the worst items in stock. They only thought they had lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves, but they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else, squiggly writing, all their life story. Now, we do the life story in the way that we just described in those columns. The life story you tell to your therapist. We do it the way these three resentments told us to. And to tell you how true this is, there was a guy in my home group, and I was new. I was in my first year. I know that. I don't remember quite how much time I had, but I just loved him. He was a jazz musician, a well-known jazz musician. And one day they asked for people with 30 days or less to raise their hand, and his hand went up, and I could not believe it. And he, after the meeting, he said, let's go have some lunch, Ray. And I said, okay. And I went to lunch with him. And he told me, he said, there was something I was never going to tell anybody on my inventory. And he said, if you have anything like that in you, put it down, because that's the reason I got drunk. He told me that was the reason he drank, because he had something he was going to take to his grave. And the guilt got to him, and he started getting resentful with people and everything else again. And he said the next thing he knew, the obsession was on him, and he drank. All right, page 73. More than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. A double life would have been an advantage in my case. I could have posed alone for a group photograph. He is very much the actor. To the outer world, he presents his stage character. This is the one he likes his fellows to see. He wants to enjoy a certain reputation, but knows in his heart he doesn't deserve it. That was me all my life. Oh my God, if they find out, they're going to know please, you gotta don't tell him much. The inconsistency is made worse by the things he does on his sprees. Coming to his senses, he is revolted at certain episodes he vaguely remembers. These memories are a nightmare. He trembles to think someone might have observed him. As fast as he can, he pushes these memories far inside himself. He hopes they will never see the light of day. He is under constant fear and tension that makes for more drinking. I can't tell you how. It amazes me that they could write these words because that's how I live. Psychologists are inclined to agree with us. We have spent thousands of dollars for examinations, but know but few instances where we have given these doctors a fair break. We have seldom told them the whole truth, nor have we followed their advice. Unwilling to be honest with these sympathetic men, we were honest with no one else. Small wonder many in the medical profession have a low opinion of alcoholics and their chance of recovery. We must be entirely honest with somebody. Now, listen to this, if we expect to live long or happily in this world. Rightly and naturally, we think well before we choose the person or persons with whom we take this intimate and confidential step. Those of us belonging to a religious denomination which requires confession must, and of course, will want to go to the properly appointed authority whose duty it is to receive it. Though we have no religious connection, we may still do well to talk with someone ordained by an established religion. We often find such a person quick to see and understand our problem. Of course, we sometimes encounter people who do not understand alcoholics. You know, now this part of the book that we're reading right now isn't so predominant today. You got to remember, it was in the day it was written. Today, there's so many more members. There's so many other. I don't know anybody that in a long, long time that had to go to a priest or a man of the cloth to do their inventory. If we cannot or would rather not do this, we search our acquaintance for a closed-mouthed, understanding friend. Perhaps our doctor or psychologist will be the person. It may be one of our own family, but we cannot disclose anything to our wives or our parents which will hurt them and make them unhappy. I have no right to save my skin at another's expense. Such parts of my story I tell to someone who will understand yet be unaffected. The rule is I must be hard on myself, but always considerate of others. Notwithstanding the great necessity for discussing myself with someone, it may be one is so situated that there is no suitable person available. If that is so, this step may be postponed. However, if we hold ourselves in complete readiness to go through with it at the first opportunity. I couldn't wait to do mine. I don't know about you guys. I took my fifth step, my 9th or 10th day in AA. I couldn't wait to tell it. I'm sure nobody said this, but when I was new, I heard things that weren't necessarily said. And what I heard was if I don't tell them and tell them everything, I'm going to get drunk. And I was still hurting. And believe me, I advise you take it when you're hurting because you'll put everything down. I put everything down that you could put down. I say this because we are very anxious that we talk to the right person. It is important that he be able to keep a confidence that he fully understand and approve what we are driving at, that he will not try to change our plan, but we must not use this as a mere excuse to postpone. When we decide who is to hear our story, we waste no time. We have a written inventory and we are prepared for a long talk. We explain to our partner what we are about to do and why we have to do it. He should realize that we are engaged upon a life and death errand. That's pretty heavy duty, isn't it? A life and death errand. Most people approached in this way will be glad to help. they will be honored by our confidence. We pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Once I have taken this step, withholding nothing, I am delighted. I don't know about you guys, but my 5th and 9th steps exhilarated me because I had never told any of that stuff to anybody. I'd never planned on making any amends to anyone. And it was the first time any humility at all ever came into my life. But I remember I was 6'2", and I think I was actually 6'2" after I finished my 9th step. You know, I was always looking at the ground before that. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone listen to these promises. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. I begin to feel the nearness of my Creator. I may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now I begin to have a spiritual experience. I'm only in step 5, and I've begun to have a spiritual experience. It said earlier, when I was going to be willing to consider that there's a power greater than me, I commenced to get results. And now I'm starting to have my spiritual experience. So I want you to see, you remember last week we talked about process? But what I didn't say to you then, I should have. Go back to page 25 for 1 second. See the squiggly writing where it says there is a solution? Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of shortcomings, which the process requires for its successful consummation. This is a process. I don't know when you're going to believe. I know I didn't believe when I was doing my 5th step. I didn't really believe. I think after I finished 8 and 9 sometime, I was starting to believe. But it took a lot for me. So now we begin to have a spiritual experience. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. We feel we are on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour. You notice how specific he is about this. I remember my sponsor said, he said, it's not 45 minutes, Ray, and not an hour and 10 minutes, an hour. Carefully reviewing what I have done. I thank God from the bottom of my heart that I know him better. Taking this book down from our shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, I ask if I have omitted anything. Now, at this time, I have to tell you, I had not done 2 and 3. And my sponsor knew that, and it was okay with him because I told him I can't do 2 or 3. I don't believe. And he said, that's fine. We're good. As long as I was willing to keep going, he was willing to keep going. For we are building an arch. Remember we read about the arch at the bottom of 62? Remember we read about the cornerstone on 47? Remember we read about the foundation on page 12? Step 1 is my foundation. Step 2 is my cornerstone. Step 3 is my keystone. Now the spiritual structure is built, and now I'm checking to make sure I've done what I'm supposed to do. Is my work solid so far? Are the stones, the ones I just mentioned, in place? Have I skimped on the cement put into the foundation? Remember on page 17, when we're talking about the feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. But right here, he says, have we tried to make mortar without sand? Cement takes 2 elements. You can't make cement with one. That's why the fellowship didn't hold us together as we are now joined. I had to know the problem and the solution and the planned program of action. Now we're going to 76. So we just completed step 5. If we can answer to our satisfaction, we then look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? So they have to be objectionable to me. Can God now take them all, every one? If I still cling to something I will not let go, I ask God to help me be willing. When ready, I say something like this: My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. There was something that really opened my eyes. I thought I had to get all good before I went to God. But it says here, good and bad. So it's okay for me to go. I'm not finished yet, you know. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. So God alone judges these things, not me. Don't judge your inventory when you go to do it. You're not trying to get an A. We're just trying to find out what are the things that have been blocking my life and keeping me stuck. And maybe some of my defects are still useful to others. I don't know. God's the one that knows that. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. We have then completed step 7. And you notice it says amen. It didn't say amen after the 3rd step prayer, but it says it after the 7th step prayer. Because I was told I was supposed to be in prayer all the way from 3 till here.
What's the significance of that?
The significance is step 3 is just a decision. I haven't completed step 3 till I've completed step 9. Steps 4 through 9 mend my spiritual malady. That's how I get over my spiritual malady. I can't get over it until I've done those steps. But for me, I did 1, I did 4, I did 5, then I did 8 and 9, then I came back to 6 and 7 because I couldn't get to God. You know, I told you my dad committed suicide when I was 20. Then within the next 2 years, I did 2 tours in Vietnam. And between what I saw in Vietnam and my dad's suicide, I blamed it all on God and thought, I don't want anything to do with you, God. I didn't deny didn't exist. I just didn't want him in my life. But when these old guys started doing all the stuff they were doing with me, it opened my mind. And it said that, if you remember when we agnostics, it says about those thousands of men and women who have gained access to and believe in. It's no mistake that access to came first. AA gave me access to start to open my mind to God. I wasn't a guy that was going to go sit in church and find God. It wasn't going to happen that way. You know, I thought I either had to sit in church or read the Bible. Turns out I was wrong. I didn't have to do anything. All I had to do was these steps. So I know there's a lot of people have a lot of concerns that it seems like it's telling us so little about 6 and 7. But with everything that we've done right now, don't you understand them a lot better right now? You know that sheet I gave you? It's in these sheets, that same sheet. So, and all I'm saying is they're about our defects of character. And I don't want to home in on my defects of character because that's pretty negative. My sponsor had a list of them. When I was done with the fifth step, he had them all listed. You know, he didn't bother me with, I didn't have to make it myself. He made it for me. And he told me, he said, what I want you to, he said, your biggest defect is self-pity. And he was right. It was number one on the list. And he said, okay, for the next year, I want you to write a gratitude list. Call me every day and read it to me. And every day I called him with the gratitude list and I read it to him. And at the end of the year, he said, hey, Ray, how's it going with the self-pity? I said, I haven't felt any. He said, good. He said, God took it while you were writing your gratitude list. So in other words, we got to do the opposite of the character defect. Selfishness, I had to be of service. They didn't even have Uber drivers then, but I thought I was one. Every day, go pick up Mike and bring him to the meeting. Go pick up Steve and bring him to the meeting. So for Christ's sake, Steve's going to talk about himself the whole way, and I want to talk about me. But all I can tell you is that the stuff they gave me to do worked. And the more it worked, the more I started thinking these guys all believe in God. You know, and I respect them and love them. And so it changed my mind about God, slowly but surely. You know, we only got a couple minutes left. I don't want to, because we're going to go right into 8 now. I'm just going to read you this one thing, because we're going to get into amends, 8 and 9, in just a second. Here's something my sponsor wrote out for me. He said, an amend is not an apology. An apology is a polite gesture that does not imply admission of guilt or regret, but only a desire to clear the air for some reason. An amends is to formally compensate others for the harm I caused them, with a sincere desire to correct my behavior of the past and for the future, to make right my wrongs. He said, so don't confuse the two, Ray. He made sure I didn't misunderstand. And that's all the time. Does anybody, on anything we talked about today, does anybody have a question?
We hear a lot about the 7 deadly sins. How does that relate when you look at what's my part? What is the exact nature of my wrongs? Can it be identified to the 7 deadly sins?
Some of them could be, but not all of them. I mean, I'll give you, for example, and I've told you guys my relationship story. I don't want to tell that anymore. I'm sick of it. But so when I finished my sex inventory, my sponsor said, man, this is really a mess. What's all this about? Now, I had put down when I was dishonest, when I was inconsiderate, but I didn't see something he saw that really helped me. He said, Ray, you're trying to build your self-esteem with all these women. I had never seen that. When he said it, I went, oh my God, he's right. That's not who I want to be. But I didn't even see it. He had to help me with that. So it's more like that. Because remember, as a sponsor, I have to help the person I'm working with to see that stuff. They can't see it on their own. I couldn't, but he saw the exact nature of my wrong every time. And he was kind about telling me, but it's pretty amazing. The bottom of my shirt says, Mr. Brown deserves an ass whipping. My inventory shirt. We got to be quiet. We got to be quiet when we finish here because there's a meeting going on next door.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank